Hello, welcome to Big Power's Unusual Activities, monitoring North Korea's illicit oil procurement network. I am joined by a host of fantastic panelists who today are going to be talking about how they have monitored and tracked North Korea's efforts to evade sanctions placed on it by the international community, and specifically those aimed at capping North Korea's ability to import refined petroleum products. Satellite imagery in tandem with ship tracking data was an essential tool for documenting and monitoring North Korea's illicit procurement networks. Today, you'll be hearing from Christoph Kettle. He is a visual investigations journalist at the New York Times. He specializes in satellite imagery analysis and open source research. He is an expert in armed conflict, human rights, and social media verification. Prior to joining the New York Times, he was part of Amnesty International's crisis response team, where he founded and edited the Citizen Evidence Lab. We'll also be hearing from Lucas Coe. Lucas is a senior analyst at the Center for Advanced Defense Studies, also known as C4ADS. He works on the Counterproliferation Cell, where he specializes in North Korean illicit shipping, financial networks, and procurement networks. We'll also be hearing from Lauren Sung, who works with Lucas at C4ADS, also in the Counterproliferation Cell. She specializes in North Korea's proliferation financing, Chinese threat finance, and transnational organized crime in Asia. We will also hear from Joe Byrne. Joe is a research analyst at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI. He works on their proliferation and nuclear policy team, where he is an expert on proliferation financing, especially as it relates to weapons of mass destruction and North Korea. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Joe to get started on what is slated to be a fantastic discussion.
Thanks very much, Anne. So today we're going to be talking about how North Korea procures and delivers its oil. This was part of an effort from three organizations, RUSI, C4ADS, and the New York Times, amounting in thousands, probably, of hours of work that people have put into it, and across almost the whole world. We've got three different aspects of the project that we want to present to you today. From the RUSI side, this project began when we were trying to assess how much oil North Korea had imported in 2020. Oil is used in North Korea in many ways, to drive cars in Pyongyang, or even provide fuel for hotels that carry North Korea's missiles. In 2017, the UN mandated an oil cap on the country of 500,000 barrels of oil. And we wanted to assess whether we could see through open sources if this oil cap had been reached, if it had been broken. Subsequent reporting from the UN panel of experts year on year note that the oil cap has been broken, but these methodologies were never openly available. So how we went about this was we looked at lots and lots of satellite imagery over the country, specifically at one oil terminal in Nampo, the main oil import infrastructure in North Korea. So we looked at lots and lots of high-res images, lots from Planet, that showed vessels delivering petroleum to North Korea. And through all these images, I think there were about 100 in all, we assessed about 50 deliveries, different vessels providing oil into the oil terminals. But aside from this, what was great about Planet Labs data was that we could also use the low resolution 3-meter imagery to see vessels that were delivering day on day with this low cadence imagery. And what we assessed from this is that we saw another 50 deliveries that were going in, including the 50 that we'd seen from the high-res imagery. So it significantly increased our capacity to understand how much oil was being delivered into North Korea and how much oil had been imported. So subsequently, using imagery analysis techniques, looking at the length and the breadth and the physical structures of the vessels, we were able to identify which specific vessels were delivering to North Korea. You can see in the presentation slide here that there's high resolution deliveries colored in yellow, but also then the low resolution imageries are colored in an orange dot. So you can see lots and lots of deliveries over the year to the specific oil import terminal in Nampo. And through the high resolution imageries, we were able to identify the vessels and identify how much oil we believed that they would be carrying. So through the 50 high resolution deliveries that we observed, we believe that if they were fully laden, then these vessels could deliver over 1 million barrels of oil to North Korea. That's over double the mandated oil cap. And then when you add on to the other imagery, the low resolution imagery that we took from Planet Labs, we used an average North Korean tanker to understand a possible average of how much this vessel may deliver. This increased the estimate to over 2 million barrels. So we understood how they were importing oil, we understood the volume, the possible volume, and it became a really important question as to how they're delivering, how they're procuring this oil to be delivered to North Korea. And the answer in the first instance is a simple one. Firstly, they were using foreign flag tankers to deliver petroleum at much larger volumes. In mid-2019, foreign flag tankers began delivering into North Korea directly. And these were much larger capacity, they were foreign flagged, and they weren't sanctioned or being monitored heavily by regulators. And what this allowed North Korea to do is to more efficiently import petroleum, import it quicker and at higher volume. One of these vessels is the Diamond 8, the largest known direct delivery tanker known to be delivering to North Korea. In just 8 deliveries, this vessel could reach the oil cap on its own, so it represents a significant sanctions evasion capability. So I've spoken about how the volume of oil that is going into North Korea, why it's an issue. I'm going to pass over to Lucas and Lauren from C3S to describe how they procure this oil from the illicit market.
Great, thanks, Joe. So we have now established clearly with imagery that North Korea continues to breach the oil cap imposed by the UN Security Council. So now the question is, how do they do it? How has North Korea and its foreign facilitators smuggled fuel from international markets at such volume over the last 4 years? In other words, what does North Korea's illicit oil supply chain look like, and who is ultimately involved? So to help us begin to answer this question, we first need to understand the pattern of life of the foreign flag tankers facilitating the transfer of oil to North Korea. And so this research teams at C4DS and RUSI collected the automatic identification system data, also known as AIS data, transmitted by the dozen or so oil tankers known to deliver oil to North Korean interests in 2020. And so each AIS transmission includes the position of the ship transmitting it. This allowed us to map the North Korea-linked oil tankers fleet's movements over the year, which is what you see in this graphic on the slide. And so there are 2 immediate takeaways. First, there is a clear concentration of activity in and around the Taiwan Strait area, especially in Chinese and Taiwanese waters, as well as in the East China Sea. You can also see the ship's transmissions taper off as they approach North Korean waters, likely to hide their intended destination. Second, these North Korea-linked tankers do not appear to be visiting oil terminals outside North Korea to pick up their cargo. This means they are likely getting most of their fuel through ship-to-ship transfers at sea. Now, these 2 general observations, as well as our in-depth investigations into individual smuggling cases, indicated that North Korea likely relies on what we call a shuttle system, which uses a network of ships with different logistical roles to systematically move fuel from onshore storage facilities onto the ships that can deliver the cargo to North Korea. So now Lauren will walk you through how the shuttle system works.
Thank you, Lucas. Like Lucas said, the shuttle system is a multi-layered tactic of ship-to-ship transfers used by fuel smuggling networks to obfuscate the origin and chain of custody of fuel as oil is moved from regional markets to North Korea. Many direct delivery tankers, and direct delivery tankers are the type of tankers that Joe and Lucas have been telling you about, have been sanctioned or identified as they've made these high-risk voyages to North Korean waters to offload fuel. Because they've been sanctioned, it would be risky for them to enter port to purchase fuel onshore, where they may be detained or investigated. So they need ways to refuel without going to port, and the shuttle system provides that. And the flowchart that you see here on the right shows this. What happens instead is that motherships, these are very large tankers, which are significantly larger than the direct delivery tankers themselves, they fuel at regional ports, such as Taiwan or South Korea. These tankers then leave port, maybe anchoring just outside of port or at one of the hotspots known as ship-to-ship transfer activity hotspots. Smaller tankers can then go to these motherships and refuel from the motherships themselves without having to go into port directly. In essence, motherships are acting like floating gas stations out at sea. So within the context of the North Korea fuel supply chain, direct delivery tankers load fuel from motherships, thereby bypassing the need to go into port and risk detainment. And that's why, as Lucas told you earlier, we don't see these direct delivery tankers going into oil terminals outside of North Korea. This chain of ship-to-ship transfers helps obfuscate exactly how the oil that ends up in North Korea is moved and where it originates from. And satellite imagery, particularly planetscope imagery within this context, is really critical to seeing how that actually plays out at sea. So here we have an example of a mothership and a direct delivery tanker. So this ship that you see in the image here is a mothership. It's called the Evergrande, and it's a pretty large tanker. And you'll be able to see that in the next image when it's next to a direct delivery tanker, which is smaller. The Evergrande in April 2020 loaded oil at Incheon Port, South Korea, as you can see here as it is docked. So in the next image, what we'll see is that a week later, the Evergrande is meeting with a smaller tanker, the Rich United, which, as you'll see, is a direct delivery tanker. This is happening in waters to the northeast of Taiwan, which is known as a ship-to-ship transfer hotspot. And this is likely when the Rich United loaded oil from the Evergrande before it made a trip to North Korea, as we'll see in this next photo. This image, which is taken from the UN panel of experts report, shows that in June 2020, the Rich United is at an oil terminal in Songnim, North Korea, having gotten its fuel from a mothership, now delivering it to the DPRK. So here we've seen how the shuttle system allows these fuel smuggling networks to move oil from regional markets to North Korea in ways that are obfuscated and hard to detect. And in the next slides, we're going to see the Diamond 8, one of these direct delivery tankers, in closer detail. So with that, I'll hand off to Christoph, who will walk us through that.
Great. Thanks a lot for all this background. I'm going to look a little bit closer at one of the ships that is part of this shuttle system. So I'm only going to talk in the end about one ship, and that's, I think, something really important. You know, being a journalist, I think obviously our main goal is to tell a very compelling story, and that's especially important when looking at a very complex story. As you just heard, this shuttle system is pretty complex. Took quite a while for RUSI and C4DS to figure out. So for us at the New York Times, this was a great story. We did a lot of our own research, of course, and reporting, but we really decided let's really focus on one specific ship to tell the larger story about this very important research. So the first slide I'm going to show, I just called it ship tracking. So this is sort of like the traditional way of sort of like tracking ships. You combine different data sources, in this case AIS ship tracking data with satellite imagery, and this is really the shuttle system at work in a way. The green dots here show the Diamond 8, the signal of the Diamond 8, and it's meeting up with one of the motherships that Lucas and Lauren were explaining. This is I think slightly north of Taiwan in June of 2020. And the AIS data is showing you how they are meeting up. But I think we really wanted to be a little bit more visual here and show it in a little bit more of a compelling way as well. And I'm going to show that in the next slide. So this is the same satellite image, a PlanetScope satellite image, a close-up. This is the ship-to-ship transfer that we already heard a lot about. And this is obviously very compelling visual evidence. If you tell a story like this, this is really gold, I would say, because you're making all these strong claims. How do you convince the reader and the viewer, in our case, that what you're reporting, what you're talking about is actually happening? And I think this is a really good example of how to do that. This was relatively easy in quotation marks because you had ship tracking data. We were lucky that we had satellite imagery to really show that. When it gets really hard when the smaller ship that you see here, the Diamond 8, is then making up its way to North Korea because it's turning off the ship tracking data. So we can't follow it anymore. So what do? Do you give up, or do you try other means? The next thing I'm going to show you is how to sort of figure out to, where did it go, and can we provide visual evidence, and can we provide proof that that delivery vessel that has oil actually went to North Korea. So what you see here in this slide is a couple of satellite images, PlanetScope imagery that has a little bit lower resolution that a lot of people might be used to from Google Maps. So it's not that high resolution, but it's really great to track things like ships, which are really, really large, oil tankers in this case. So this was a very painful process, but in the end, a very rewarding and fun process. We spent days to look at this medium resolution satellite imagery, trying to figure out if a ship that matches the dimensions and the visual characteristics of the Diamond 8 in Nampo. So we knew it went off the radar, in this case, in late May of 2020. So we sort of took a week of satellite imagery and looked at every single spot in the Nampo area, which is pretty large, if we could find a ship that might match these characteristics. And we found one ship using, in this case, PlanetScope imagery and also Sentinel imagery that's even lower resolution to determine that there was a ship that could be the Diamond 8 in a 4-day period. So that was sort of a good finding, but it was obviously not good enough to be certain. And also this imagery was not strong enough, I would say, to present it visually to a larger audience, because obviously a lot of people would question these findings. So what we did here, of course, once we had the time window of 4 days and the exact location, we just went and looked for high resolution imagery, meaning below 1 meter resolution imagery. So again, the stuff that you know from Google Maps. We were lucky that there was a lot of availability of high resolution imagery. As is often the case, this was very cloudy, but there was one single image, and this is just to identify the Diamond 8 here again. There was one image that was cloud-free from a Spanish provider. So that's what we used to take a closer look. We used all the high resolution satellite imagery to establish a sort of visual footprint or a visual fingerprint of the ship, how it looks like, and to match it up. So is this really the Diamond 8? I'm going to play a very short clip here that we used in our final video output. On the right side, you see the Diamond 8 on May 30th in Nampo, and on the left side, you see just the reference visual. So that's sort of like standard investigative work to really match up your evidence against reference materials. And I think this is really the perfect example of the added value of satellite imagery for this sort of investigative work. It doesn't matter if it's medium resolution or high resolution. If you bring these two things together, you can have really, really strong outcomes, in my opinion. And the last thing I want to say on this, another added value of satellite imagery is that it's basically a time machine. So you can go back in time to look for evidence. Obviously, you cannot go back in time to task the satellite to collect new imagery for you. We're not there yet. But once you have your leads and once you have sort of like a system identified, such as the shuttle system, you can really go back in time and establish a pattern, right? So this is not a single delivery or an accident or a coincidence, but you go back in time and look for a pattern and the repeated sort of like violations of the sanctions that we're talking about here. So here you see 4 images, 3 of them SkySat planet imagery, and the last one is the image from May 2020 that I already mentioned. All of these show the Diamond 8 in Nampo, the big North Korean oil port. So again, these are 2, I think, very strong small examples of the added value of satellite imagery for this sort of work. It is very, very hard work, depends a lot on documents and other things. So having this type of visuals are really, really important for journalistic purposes, of course. And that brings me sort of to the takeaways and conclusion of our little project that I think we carried out over the period of, I think, together like 4 to 6 months, but I know Lucy and C4 has worked on this already much longer. But a couple of things that I want to highlight as takeaways. So the first thing is that I already alluded to is satellite imagery can really be extremely critical, extremely important and critical evidence for investigative work. On the one hand, that is becomes very clear when you follow a very specific ship and just follow the route from maybe the reception of the oil, like receiving the oil and then bringing it to North Korea. That's great also for storytelling purposes. But I think it's important to keep in mind the type of comprehensive assessment you can do. And that's what you saw at the beginning of the presentation, like really looking over a 12-month period at every single satellite image of one specific port in North Korea and determining how many deliveries there were and estimating how many barrels went into the country. That is something that people very often overlook. So it's not just a single trip that might be very compelling and fun to look at, but this systematic and comprehensive assessment really add a lot of value to gaining this type of insights. The second thing that is really important, I think, to walk away with is it's such a powerful storytelling tool, and that's really the bread and butter of my job. How do you sort of like tell the story that's really complex, but that's also done in hiding mostly, and that's really invisible? How do you visualize that, and how do you present that to a large audience? How do you get 2 million people to watch a story like this? And that's where satellite imagery obviously provides a lot of added value. I encourage you to look at the report, and the links are provided here to really like take a deeper look at the shuttle system and all the organizations and individuals behind it. But you can also watch our video. If you watch the opening of the video, it has a really cool opening shot with a very cloudy satellite image that we would normally never use. But that's another way of sort of like building up mystery at the beginning of a story using, in this case, a cloudy satellite imagery that adds so much value to get people to watch a story that doesn't make headlines every day and that is really complex. So I think we were all pretty happy with the outcome in terms of the evidence that we provided, but also in terms of the storytelling. And I think satellite imagery really made a big difference in this case.
Well, Christoph, Lucas, Lauren, and Joe, I think I speak for everyone who will be watching this session that the efforts that each of your organizations has put into this is incredibly impressive. And I speak for Planet when I say that we are thrilled when we are able to help power this type of research. You are making the invisible visible, and you are really pushing the edge on monitoring these types of sanctions evasions and all things that we don't normally think about in when it comes to North Korea. It's typically missiles and nuclear weapons capture everyone's mind, but I think this is work that is incredibly impressive and important. And I really thank you all for taking the time to share this work with us.